Do you need tangible proof to believe the resurrection? You can say you don't, but many of us secretly wish we had some. Today's stop on our journey of following the gospel accounts of the resurrection of appearances of Jesus involves two very brief scenes separated by a week, but which are meant to be read together. The first scene introduces a note of tension. The second scene resolves that tension. And all I have to do is say two words, and you'll instantly know what the two scenes are and how they relate to proof. Doubting Thomas. But before we jump to instant conclusions, either about this passage or about the figure of Thomas, let's stop and linger for a bit and ponder what this is really all about. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Thursday, April 20th, 2023. You know, I kind of feel for Thomas. Among the 12 disciples, he speaks more than most. At least the Gospels record him speaking more than most, though not as much as Peter or Judas. And tradition tells us that he took the gospel message to the Indian subcontinent, where in southwest India there has been a Christian presence since literally the 1st century. He's clearly an important figure in the early church. But what we know him for most is the scene in which he plays a less than laudatory role. But let's not judge him too quickly or harshly. In many ways, he's a lot like us. Here's the setup. On the evening of the day when Mary Magdalene discovered the empty tomb, the disciples are gathered together in a closed room, and Jesus suddenly appears in their midst. After dispelling their fears, he breathes the Holy Spirit on them and gives them instructions for their ministry ahead. But one of the disciples is not with them. That's where we pick up the story. But Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hands in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." We customarily think condescendingly of Thomas for his lack of faith, for his doubt, and his need for tangible proof that Jesus has indeed been raised. But what if John picks up this story for a particular reason? You can bet that nearly everything this gospel writer writes does have a context to it. There are two pieces to this backdrop, actually. Remember that this gospel wasn't written for literally decades after Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. It's a pretty fair bet that there were those in what we call the Johannine community, the church gathered by John, who had their doubts about the resurrection. Indeed, there were many early Christians who adopted an attitude that the church has branded docetism, from the Greek word dokein, meaning to seem. These people believed that both before and after the resurrection, Jesus just seemed to be a human being, but really was a kind of disembodied spirit all along. If that is the first part of the subtext for this story, Thomas stands in for those believers who tended toward a docetic understanding of Jesus. The answer in the hands of this gospel writer is to use this scene as a kind of rebuke in order to affirm what the church ultimately settled on, that Jesus was a real flesh and blood human being who really suffered the pains of scourging and crucifixion, who really and truly died, and who was raised physically from the tomb and appeared in the flesh to the disciples and ultimately to others as well. Thomas is also a stand-in, if you will, for a second subtext, a second group of people. Thomas, you see, needed actual, tangible proof before he would believe. In a way, he represents a lot of Christian believers, even today, who still desire some tangible sign of the resurrection. That's why there are so many believers who make pilgrimages to holy sites to see and even touch things they believe to be associated with Jesus. Go to Jerusalem, and you will see throngs of people clamoring to touch the place where tradition holds that the cross stood, and who kneel down and kiss a flat stone in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where they believed Jesus' body was laid as they took him off the cross, and who wait in long lines to touch the spot where tradition holds that Jesus was laid in the tomb. It is why so many venerate things like the Shroud of Turin. It is because of our all-too-human need for tangible proof of things we did not personally witness. But to Thomas and to us, Jesus says, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." Tomorrow, the lengthy story of a simple breakfast on the beach. Until then, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do, this day and in all the days ahead.